Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. Today I wanted to do two things. One of them was to focus on just a comment about the Freedom March, the protests against mask mandates, and I wanted to also talk about Oxford and Stonehenge, and the fourth row of the World Peace Marketing Strategy. I'm going to just, I'm a platform thinker, and so instead of seeing things logically, I have all this information, and then I need to put it into a structure that people can understand. So when I explain something, sometimes I'm pulling things from lots of different places and trying to make a point. Okay. Today with the protests, I wanted to just say the idea, if you were standing up in protest, unless you can come up with a plan that benefits everyone, nobody's going to listen to what you have to say. Everybody has their own agenda. Governments are designed, are there to solve problems, and if they're not solving the problems, then basically there's going straight ahead and down. As I talked about, there's always three choices: up, down, or straight ahead. If they're not solving the problems, then there's either straight ahead or down. Excuse me. When you protest, you have to have a plan that benefits everyone. Otherwise, your plan, nobody listens to what you have to say. And regarding mask mandates, the government has the right to do that. Now, going across, so where do your rights come from? The rights, there's unalienable rights, there's constitutional rights, and then there's let's say the rights that people give you for other reasons or whatever. But constitutional and unalienable rights are two very different things. Your unalienable right to protest is different than an unalienable right to protest in the United States. A constitutional right is just in the United States. Canada has a different structure of government. It's not like the United States. So going over to Canada and saying we have our constitutional rights doesn't make sense. You're subject to the laws of Canada when you're in Canada. It's a different country. Okay, traveling across the border, and part of this is it really affecting the transportation across if you're forced to wear a mask? I was a dental hygienist, and I had to wear a mask all day long. It didn't interfere with anything that I was doing. Driving a truck, you don't have to wear your mask in your truck. You can leave it off, and then when you go across the border, you can put it back on. You can follow the laws without it interfering in your freedom. Your freedoms are the idea that when you're talking about the freedom of the constitutional right, you have the freedom of assembly, you have the freedom in the United States, you have the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, and all of these, and the freedom of the press, they're delineated in the Constitution. Nobody can take away those freedoms from you. You have the right to go to Washington, D.C. and protest. But also, there's no guarantee that anybody's ever going to listen to you, and there's unless you can come up with a plan, they won't listen to you because they have their own agenda. Okay, the governments are required. Part of their responsibility is to ensure that you don't take away the freedoms from somebody else. If you are sick with COVID, then basically, are you interfering in the freedoms of other people to be able to live their life? If you are protesting, you cannot take away somebody else's freedoms. You cannot protect your freedoms. An example of that is gun rights. You have the right to bear arms by the Constitution. You don't have the right to kill people. You can, if you have an AR-15, don't take it off the shooting range. Don't use it in a crime. Don't go hunting with it, because I'll tell you what, if you use an AR-15 on a deer or something like that, I don't see how that is going to be meat for your family. Something that that the states allow you to do because they issue licenses. You have the right to do something because the states have the rights. And so I wanted to talk about, if you are protesting something, no one has the right to prevent you from creating your life. So all of these things are, you have the right to do what you are for yourself, but you cannot interfere in somebody else's rights. Okay, it comes down for unalienable rights, and I've said this before. If it's an unalienable right, then basically nobody can take that away from you. And the reason for it is it becomes a matter of the contract that you have, a soul agreement that you have with your Creator to fulfill your purpose in life. Wearing a mask doesn't interfere with that. That is not something where it's interfering with your life. For you to do that, for you to say that it's interfering with your life, it isn't interfering with your life, because wearing a mask, as a dental hygienist, I had to wear one all day long. Dental people, medical people wear masks all day long, and it doesn't interfere with their ability to do their job. In fact, it benefits people to have that there because it creates a barrier between you. You don't want somebody who's doing your surgery to spread germs onto the site. It's sterile. See what I mean? It doesn't interfere. If you're a trucker, it doesn't interfere with your life. It's an inconvenience. It doesn't take away your rights. Okay, so the government has a right to do something like that in the public interest, and that is to prevent barriers. Okay, now if you're going to protest masks, this is what I recommend that you do. If you don't like wearing masks, don't interfere with somebody else wearing masks. And when you are in public, wear a mask because it doesn't interfere. If you don't like it, sorry. It's like saying you have the right to drive on the wrong side of the road, but you don't because it causes chaos. So we don't want chaos in our system. We don't want to have somebody who believes in masks to have to stand up and defend themselves from you. And if you're the guy with a gun, are you going to shoot somebody? You're going to take away their right to their life by doing that, by demanding that you have the right to do that. You don't. Okay, so if it's an unalienable right from God, there's an alternative that benefits everyone. All right, I'm going to explain. When you have a plan, when you have a crisis, your plan has to address the root cause of the problem. And if it doesn't, then it makes the problem worse. It's like it sends off ripples of effects, or it just goes down, like I've said before. If your plan benefits everyone, it addresses the root cause of the problem, but it also stands on the principles that it doesn't interfere with anybody else's life. You don't have the right to interfere in somebody else's life. The idea of a coming up with a new invention. How many movies have you watched where you see somebody coming up with a new idea, and the government immediately is going to use it as a weapon? An example of this was, and I'm not sure, this is a story that I've heard, but I'm working in a dental office. The old-fashioned impression material, it was heated up by water. It was originally designed to be used it could be used as a rocket fuel, and then they used it as it's a solid rocket fuel, and they used it in mouths because it was an impressionable material. Okay, so if you come up with a plan that is here, it's a creativity that solves a problem. And I'm gonna, when you're faced with a pure race student, you understand how the planning process works. So you can understand that planning circle if you go on pureray.org, pureray.org, and then you can understand how what I'm talking about with the planning circle. In fact, if you want to create the life you want, I recommend that you go there, and it's just in the infancy stages right now, but it explains how the 7 major religions are unified. So let's say this, and I'll use them as an example. If you have Christianity, and then around the circle it starts with Christianity being creativity, Judaism as productivity, Buddhism is prosperity, Islam is equality, Hinduism teaches the principles of security, Confucius taught the principles of capacity, and the Taoism is tolerance and empowerment. So, and it goes around a circle. If you want to create the life you want, which is what everybody wants, that's why I'm referring you to this website and it's just the beginning. It teaches people the planning steps on how to create the life you want. Because each of the 7 major religions teaches one segment of the information. It's like a computer game where you go around and you get the keys. You get the keys of creativity from Christianity. But each plays a power game also. So you think of Muslims and terrorism, but they teach the principles of equality, standing up in protest. Okay, so if you go too far, you don't have the right to interfere in somebody's life. You can protest, but you can't interfere with somebody else's life. When you're denied a voice, that's when you raise your voice to be heard, oftentimes to the point of violence. So you're learning, the protests are learning the principle, the protesters and the trucks, learning the principles of Islam right now. Believe it or not. You don't have to believe it, but if you want to create the life you want, I recommend you go to pureray.org and find out what all these religions teach, because it's pretty amazing. You can go around the planning circle, but you need to have the root cause of the problem. Otherwise, you make the problem worse. And then you have to understand the power games. Okay, so if you have an unalienable right, when you start out with a plan, which is creativity, you have an idea, but then it goes into the planning process, and that has to do with productivity. You're producing something, a plan, you're starting a business, you're building a house, you're doing something like that. But on the opposite side of that, you have to deal with security issues. You have to deal with Rama. So the security issues are like military. They're dealing with, you have a new idea, the military comes in and is going to take control of it. How many videos have you watched? How many movies have that plot in them where somebody has a new idea and then they have to deal with security issues? This is kind of like how you're going around the circle. Okay, now, if it's something where you have a conflict between the Christians and the Muslims, the whole idea is that everybody wants to create the life they want. And that's the midpoint that allows everybody to create the life they want. It's the midpoint idea. So if you are going to protest mask ideas, you have to understand where the virus came from. Where did it come from? Where do viruses come from? And that's when I introduced the idea that I wrote my letter to the governor of Oregon, and the idea of where viruses come from, because I was a dental hygienist and I had to deal with the idea of AIDS. That's when we started to wear our masks all the time and wear gloves and all suit up, because we had to assume everybody was sick. Everybody had AIDS and nobody was going to tell us how to do it. We were using, let's say, crutches because now, in fact, there's a new HIV variant that's been discovered. It's been lurking around for a while. But there's a new HIV variant out, and where does that come from? How do you take an idea, a plan, and down here address the protests associated with it? When Joe Biden, for example, or anybody put the mask mandate on, Tony Fauci put the mask mandate on it, he was aware that there was a problem. He had to treat everybody equally, the principles of equality, but he had a plan. Now, people are protesting that, but we have to kind of unravel all this chaos to understand where it comes from. Okay, I wanted to share with you, now, if you want to find out about where the viruses come from, including HIV and the pandemic, go onto my organization website and then go onto the World Peace Plan blog that we have listed on there. The World Peace Plan blog basically explains where the virus comes from and how to solve the problem. And if you want to go along without a mask, then why don't you just go onto onto my blog and read about where the viruses come from, and then you can solve this problem. When you protest, you can say, we would like you to support the plan for the international government because it solves the problem, basically. The protests don't help, and the calling somebody a snake doesn't solve the problem. It makes the problem worse. It's a plan. The freedom protests are not going to guarantee your freedom. Basically, they're going to make the virus last longer. All right. So I'll put the blog descriptions down below. The last thing I wanted to talk about now was something that had to do very similarly to this idea. That is, I've been working on the world peace marketing strategy for the fourth row people, the people who function for their own interests, the people who start rebellions. Okay, so let's say that the people who are driving those trucks are functioning for their own interests. They're demanding their freedoms, but denying other people their freedoms. Because, tell you what, there was if you are walking through a store and somebody is spreading germs all over, touching the food and things like that, it's kind of gross, isn't it? So you have the right to go in and live in a pristine environment. That's an unalienable right that we have too. Okay, now what I wanted to do, nobody has the right to take somebody else's life away from them. That's an unalienable right that we have from God. God doesn't say that. We have to fulfill our purpose in life, and when we're done, we can leave and do something else. But people used to live to be 800 years old, and that's because they knew how to create the life they wanted. Back to the idea of the faith of the pure ray, and on the blog. So that's still in its infancy. I wanted to talk about the fourth row people today, and the people who are functioning for their own interests. I came across the fourth row people. If you go on there, and I'll put that link down below too, so you can go back and think about this, and take what I'm saying as an idea, and then follow up on it. Because basically, it solves your problems to do this. I'm a problem solver person. Okay, the fourth row people who function for their own interests are 180 degrees from where they think they are. They're pushing away the people they need, and they're holding on to the people they don't need. This is an example of, let's say, if you believe that you want prosperity in your own life, which is fine. We spend most of our life thinking about ourselves, which is we have to start our own business. We have to start our own family. Nobody can make us wealthy except ourselves. We can't rely on somebody else to make us prosperous. The backbone of any economy is not Donald Trump. The backbone of any economy is small business, and that is a mom and pop type business or a partnership. And these are the principles that Judaism teaches. The principles of starting a plan and bringing in the people you need to help you do it. When you think of Jews, don't you think of the people who have started small businesses, mom and pop businesses? Then they create a sense of prosperity for themselves. They're productive and they know how to do things. They bring in partners, like two brothers will come together to start a business. Okay, and they make it together, working together. Okay, that's it. When you're doing that, that's what I'm looking at. Okay, with the fourth row people, though, they're relying on somebody else to help them get their life, like Donald Trump, to make them prosperous again. He's going to give us our freedoms. He's going to make America great again. It's God and the Constitution that give us our freedoms. And the Constitution doesn't apply in Canada. So going across the border and breaking their laws doesn't help, doesn't solve the problem. It just puts you in a Canadian jail. And they have their own system. Okay, so what I wanted to do is talk about the fourth row people and explain something here. The people who are doing that are the ones who start rebellions, start revolutions, rebellions. They're the ones who have started the insurrection. Okay? So fourth row people function for their own interests, but they're 180 degrees from where they think they are. Donald Trump, for example, using him as an archetype, has relied on Russia to help him become president of the United States, for example, but instead of working within the United States, within the structure that exists. Okay, so he's always looking outside what he's doing. He's functioning outside of his capacity, so he's relying on other people to do his thinking for him, but he's in charge, but he's outside of his capacity. He said he was going to run the country like a company, and he can't, because nonprofit organizations, a government is basically a nonprofit organization, and because it's supposed to solve problems for the people. It's a charitable nonprofit organization. Okay, then when he has done it, he's relied on Russia and their interference. We never resolved that issue of Russian interference in our elections. And so we're dealing with a hostile takeover now of our country. China and Russia have announced that they're going to come together and they're going to push Joe Biden basically with NATO, and they're pushing. Okay, they're pushing him. They're trying to back him into the corner. But when you're backed into the corner, when you're protesting, you do what's in everyone's best interest. If you have a plan and it's over here, security, you have to do what's in everyone's best interest for it to be heard, so everybody moves ahead. Same thing with Russia. So Russia and China, the international government, instead of starting a rebellion, instead of starting a conflict, a global conflict with the United States, they have their missiles now. They're going out and they're going to use them. They're going to start a conflict. Okay, that's what their threat is, to back Joe Biden into the corner. He has a plan. He said he's working on security issues. The plan for the international government exists. It's been talked about. You're listening to it. It's been talked about. Lots of people have opened it up to debate. We have members in 87 countries. We leveraged it to the world leaders through the ambassadors. All the ambassadors have government proposals on how to do that. They leveraged it. They like the plan. They leveraged it to the world leaders. Now you have two countries, maybe three. Let's say you have Russia, China, and the United States, and they're all three countries that, according to the UN, there's supposed to be no acts of aggression between them. So the UN is no longer relevant, and Kofi Annan said that. What we have right now is the international government that's there. So if you have members in 87 countries who are talking about it, and the ambassadors are talking about it, and let's say that Russia and China cannot back Joe Biden into the corner if he stands on that plan that benefits everyone. He's in the middle of this idea of the plan and conflict. All people have to do is stand on the plan for the international government, open it up to debate, and work within the structure of that. So we're talking about now that's the only way that he's going to solve his problems, is that by supporting the plan for the international government, then he backs China and Russia in the corner. But it benefits them because China and Russia, nobody's going to make Putin or Xi Jinping the emperor of the planet. They have their own laws within their own country. They can do in their own country what the country will tolerate them doing. But the plan for the international government, like I said about going across the bridge, you can't make laws for another country because and this is something that we learned in Iraq. The United States tried to go in to control Iraq and they couldn't control them. Basically, people in their kitchens were coming up with IEDs and defending their country with something they whipped up in their kitchen. From the coalition countries, they defended themselves with just ingenuity, the same way that we did in the United States, the colonies did against England, and the Hessians and George Washington and crossing the Delaware. Okay, so the fourth row people is what we're talking about now, and these are the people who play the game of lust, one of the 7 deadly sins. Okay, the fourth row people, as they're going on, there's 3 different ideas. Okay, the first one is they're making waves. Intolerance leads to oppression. It's making waves. Ripples of effects go out, making waves like this. Intolerance leads to war. I'm more important than you are leads to wars, basically. Everybody's equal. If you have a plan that says I'm more important than you are, somebody's going to stand up and say, no, you're not. You know, hey, you're waging war on me. All I have to do is support the plan for the international government and no more wars, because it makes more sense to settle disputes in court rather than the battlefield. All right. So we're talking about somebody who, there's 2 power games. Revenge brings together 5 power games. 2 of them are based on weaving an illusion. That is genocide and slavery. Okay, so these are the ones where, when the other 3, when wars and massacres and terrorism stop working, they don't work anymore. There are 2 of them that keep on working, and that is genocide and slavery. And those are based on weaving an illusion. You could say the big lie. They're talking about the lie. When you have freedom of the press, that's because a free press will prevent a government from weaving this illusion. We haven't had this kind of thing in our country really for a long time. Racism is that, denying people a voice. It's an act of revenge. So when we're talking about the exit strategy for Iraq, and we're talking about revenge, how it works, why it doesn't work, because power games compensate for lack of power. But we're trying to break through this illusion idea that, okay, so where is the power? What are true power games? So I'm going to share with you something here that I found on the internet. This is Vixen Tor. Okay, when the games reach their ultimate conclusion, they go around the circle 3 times. And I showed you that with my invention that I have up here, my oatmeal box invention. When it goes around, the light source invention is a... in fact, I have a website blog about that too. When it goes around 3 times, then that's the end of the cycle. Then that's when it leads to the extremes. You start out with intolerance, and it leads to oppression. Then it leads to losing your rights, and it creates a ripple. The second time around, let's say in a family you have a a father who's worried about his job and he's oppressive and intolerant, and he goes around. And then the mother gets fed up with the whole thing and she says, enough is enough. I'm not going to deal with your abuse anymore. And then she takes him to court. But then the third time around the circle is when if he comes back after her, and that's when you see family murders and suicides and things like that. Okay, so it starts out with oppression, and then step by step it goes further than that. But revenge doesn't work because it's each of the people who are involved with it are undermining each other. It's a lack of power. It's not a power game. It compensates for lack of power. Okay, so this is an idea that Torhana's freedom is the next project. Torhana was a woman who lived a long time ago, probably in England and around Stonehenge. The tors are piles of rocks. They come up, they float up out of the ground. In a farmer's field, he'll pick up the rocks that float up out of the ground and then put them on those fences. That's why they go through, and the rocks are in the ground, and as they float up, and then they build those rock walls. But the tor does the same thing. The rocks float up, even those great big huge ones. But once they reach a certain point out of the ground, then the lifting action stops, and that's how they get to be rocks like that. They'll lift them up, and they can lift them on the ground. A long time ago, they didn't have prisons. They would take people who were out of control, and they would put them they would dig kind of a hole in the ground around the rocks, build a little cave, and then they would put the people in them. And then it was like, time out. Let's say if you can't, you were tired of dealing with you, they stoned them with the tors. They put them in there. They didn't hit them. They just buried them alive in there. I don't think anybody really ever thinks of tors as being prisons, but then I came across this idea. So Hannah came to me. You could say she's one of my guides. I can talk to anyone on the other side. She came to me and said she wanted me to help her be free. She was buried alive in a tor a long time ago, and now what's going to happen is Torhana's freedom is a way to stop the people who function for their own interests, who weave this illusion. So if they're weaving an illusion, now I'm going to give you another part of history. It has to do with abuse of power. When there's stories about other people being buried alive, and one of them is Merlin the magician, King Arthur's story. He was buried alive supposedly in the Crystal Cave, and that was a book that was very popular back in the 1960s, mid-60s, early 70s, the Crystal Cave. Mary Magdalene was stoned. She had demons. Okay, we're talking about people whose fears have flip-flopped. They're 180 degrees from where they think they are. But part of it, and another one is Joan of Arc. These are historians, people who are witches, the witch hunt idea. Donald Trump talks about witch hunt, and now we're looking at what the witch hunt really is, unraveling the confusion about witch hunts. When Donald Trump talks about witch hunts, he's talking about the person who's weaving an illusion, like playing the game of lust. One of the 7 deadly sins who's weaving an illusion is an act of revenge. When you look at Joan of Arc, there was a hostile takeover of France going on from the 100 Years' War, and from England. Henry V invaded France from England, and he started when he moved into the Burgundy region, basically, probably he's going, oh good, we have wine now, better wine than we can grow back in England. Okay, because France is known for its wine. When you have all of these ideas going on with revenge, you have these 5 power games, and we go into that in the books. But when you have somebody like the Burgundians who moved in, or the Romans moving into around Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, controlling things, the people, let's say the people like who function for their own interests, like the crazy woman from Joan of Arc, the Mary Magdalene, and the abuse of power, trying to defend the England from all the hostile takeovers. So when you have something that is a new idea, like I said, you have an idea and then you have to deal with security. How did they deal with security issues when you have people inside their own country who are, let's say Russia is coming into Ukraine, and that Ukraine was part of the Russian Federation. And so there are people who are Russian sympathizers saying, why don't we go back there and be part of Russia again? Or they all speak the same language and you can't tell them apart. And you have all of this, these people under there undermining this idea. If Donald Trump accepted and has been compromised by Vladimir Putin, and he's doing that, you have people who now trust Russia over the United States because they're 180 degrees from where they think they are. So the whole idea now is the plan for the international government. If there's a dispute, disputes will be settled in court rather than the battlefield, and Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden and Xi Jinping will never interfere in anybody else's life. We can go on, and basically the international attorneys will handle the situation. We never have to worry about war. The money wasted on war will go to the people instead. If there's a dispute, instead of coming up with all these very, very expensive military security issues, it comes down to the point where if you have a plan and you have security, your plan doesn't necessarily solve the problem, so it creates this, but what you want is the midpoint where everybody can go ahead forward and to create the life they want, because that's our unalienable right that we have from our Creator. Joe Biden does not have to worry about Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. China is looking for natural resources, and they're going out there and saying, in fact, Trevor Noah was, I watch him, and Trevor Noah, he did a video on, and he talked about China making Africa colonies. Okay, they're going out, they're looking for natural resources. They're looking for a way to become prosperous again, but they're doing it on the backs of the people. They're going into other countries. They're saying, I'm going to work with this guy. He owns the natural resources, but the country owns the natural resources. Okay, you cannot go in and steal somebody's natural resources by saying, okay, I'm going to work with you and together you're going to help me do this. Okay, see how that works? The international government will create trade agreements so China can get what it needs. Everybody can get what they need. If they have economists from all the countries coming together as part of the economic structures, economic departments of the international government, they can make trade agreements, and they will never, because all the countries will be equal, China can get its resources without having to start genocides in Darfur or in the Democratic Republic of Congo with Ebola, or any of those other places like that. It's in nobody's best interest for China to do that. These are people who function for their own interests, basically, and they're coming up with plans that don't even benefit them. Okay, so now Vixen Tor was kind of interesting because going back to Stonehenge, we're going back 5,000 years or so. I don't know when Hannah died, but this was one. Hannah wants her freedom. She was still trapped in that Tor. She wanted to get out because the plan prevented her from going forward. She broke universal law by doing what she did. She allowed the hostile takeover, you could say, she allowed them to come in. Let's say she was a prostitute. She had no family. She was a prostitute, and she was playing one end against the other, lying to both sides. And then they were saying, okay, I own you. You're part of our culture. We don't want you doing that. So we're talking about these people. And in the United States, that happened during the Revolution, when let's say the wives of the British soldiers in the colonies, they were there for a long time. They took wives, and all of a sudden, they were the colonies. They could take colonial wives, and then when the Revolution started, the wives were going, "I'm a colonist. I'm married to a British soldier." Okay, so the soldiers were saying, when they found out their wives had this split allegiance, they took them to England, and they were not allowed to come back into the colonies. They took their wives to England, and then they came back and fought. They were there all along. And then that's one of the situations with the Alien and Sedition Act, I believe. John Adams had to kind of clean up the mess. Okay, but it wasn't necessarily the right idea. Okay, so Vixen Tor is, let's say you have Tor Hannah's freedom, and basically that is for her to do what's in everyone's best interest, instead of having a split allegiance, to say the revolution, if you to England, let's say they could have said, if you want a trade agreement here, our country needs to prosper. England was oppressive to places like Ireland, Northern Ireland. When they took it over, they moved in and they kept Northern Ireland suppressed. Okay, they kept India suppressed. They kept things down. But what they wanted to do was to create a trade agreement between the new country, and that's eventually what happened, is the trade agreement came out. So if you are allowing Russians to come in, Ukraine has the right to stand up and say that we are an equal. We're going to join the international government. You have your freedom at that point in time because you're equal to all the other countries. Why would Ukraine be like this oppressed area because like a proxy war being fought over them? Wouldn't it be better to just say, join the international government, the debate on the international government? If you need natural resources, you don't have to go into Africa, because the natural resources will belong to the people, and it'll benefit the people. For them, natural resources, Africa has lots of natural resources they're like bank accounts for them, and they never go to benefit the people. They just live in poverty. The average people live in poverty in a land that is just absolutely diamonds laying on the ground. They coltan. If you have a cell phone, your coltan might be coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. and the people there don't benefit from it because the mines get sold to some big place. Like, isn't that kind of what happened with diamonds? Diamonds are stones there that that fall on the ground, and they can pick them up, but the companies, the big diamond companies, have taken them and then have made them like a resource, but it benefits mostly the people who own the companies. So this is something that has to change, where the people are the ones who own the resources, and that's one of our future things. Vixen Tor is in Dartmoor, and if Torhana had a problem, let's say that this Dartmoor is just like 15 miles from Vixen Tor is the Pew Tor. It's called Pew Tor. If you search for that, Vixen Tor, if the coast is here of England, down here, well, you can't really see that very well. If this is Dartmoor over here, the coast is right down along here like this. It's only 15 miles from there to here, and it's a high point where let's say when two kings came together there, they would meet there. We'll go into that in the Oxford and Stonehenge thing. But when you talk about, I'm talking about Russian sympathizers or the sympathizers. Imagine that England dealt with hostile takeover from the Saxons, the Romans, the Normans from northern France. You've had one after another. The first one was actually kind of like, well, I'll tell you this story of how Stonehenge came about in another video. But we're talking now about hostile takeovers. So if the United States allows Russia to interfere, if we don't go along with the plan for the international government, and Russia and China come in, they have cybersecurity, they've got missiles that can hit us, they've hypersonic missiles that we can't shoot down, they've got torpedoes, they can nesting doll can chew up our satellites, our communication satellites, and we don't have internet, we don't have anything anymore. Most of our population is on the coast. They have torpedoes that can go 100 miles inland. So if under the circumstances, we can't defend ourselves anymore. But what we have is our greatest natural resource is our Constitution. It's not our military, it's not our economy. Other people have great economies and great militaries, but it's our Constitution, because it guarantees people their rights and their freedoms. And by sharing them with people in other countries like Africa, Ukraine, it doesn't have to join NATO. All it has to say is we support the plan for the international government. We're equal to everybody else. We have our right to create our life, creativity. Jesus taught the principles of creativity. And Muhammad about standing in protest, but equality too. These are the principles that bring everybody together to be able to create the life they want. Anybody who is playing any of the power games is not able to create their life. Revenge is not a tool for creativity. Revenge is a compensatory power game that demonstrates lack of power. You believe if you're getting revenge on somebody, you don't believe that you can create your life. And that's people die. It's one of the 7 deadly sins. Okay, so if you read about Vixen Tor, about how, let's say, you can understand how this is going to work. Vixen Tor lies between Tavistock and Princetown. So imagine that two kings are coming together to solve the problems at Stonehenge. They're going to be treated equally. They realize that you cannot decimate your troops, your warriors. You don't get anywhere. Like a third one will come in, and third king will come in and try and control it. So if we have a situation now where Russia's coming in, and we're replaying Stonehenge, and we're part of Stonehenge's history, and so we're going to settle disputes at Stonehenge, genocides at Stonehenge. We're setting up a new protocol for ending genocides. All of this information is going to be used to stop the hostile takeover that started with England and had all those different invasions, hostile takeovers. The United States right now is dealing with a hostile takeover, and if Russia and China succeed, the United States is just going to be another third world country, and basically all our resources will go to Russia and China. But if we stand up and defend ourselves, saying we're equal to everybody else, we have our Constitution. That's our niche. Our Constitution is what brought everybody here. The people in 87 countries support the plan for the international government because it makes sense. It's an idea that benefits everyone. It solves the problems. If the UN can't solve the problem of Russia and China and the United States on the Security Council, for heaven's sakes, those three countries basically have agreed that not to do any acts of aggression. But when George Bush invaded Iraq, he justified it, and then basically he, according to Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he said George Bush made the United Nations irrelevant. So now, what if we have relied on the UN to solve our problems and it can't? It's time for us to come up with a better plan, one that benefits everyone and allows everyone their constitutional rights based on the international government. That's going to be written by all the people, a delegation from all the countries. And it won't be passed until everyone's in agreement with it. And then basically that's where it is. Everybody who wants to says I'm for this will if they're willing to stand up and defend it, then the people will stand up and they will help make that process. The Vixen Tor was a woman who basically resisted being put into the Tor. And what she did was, instead of saying, I support one side or the other, she couldn't say one or the other. Basically, we're going to put her in the Tor, but she murdered. We know that. See, people who play the game of lust, they hold people to them in slavery. The extreme level is they hold people to them in slavery and weaving this illusion, or they push them away. They hold people to them, push them away. They don't want to be hurt. They fear intimacy. It's one of the power games. We need to find out about those power games. And what Vixana did was she murdered the people who were going to bury her alive. She felt she had the right to get her life, but she didn't have the right to get her life by taking away other people's rights. So she basically was murdered herself. And that's the story here. Tavistock and Princetown. These, if you take this idea and play the sleuth for a little while, go through this mystery like I did, Princetown, if it was one of the places where kings were housed, if this was the Princetown, the town of the prince, that's where they would have been wined and dined on their way to Stonehenge. They would come across the coast, come up the coast, and then they would be wined and dined. They would be Tavistock would be the place where let's say the person who had the royal seal, basically had the royal right by royalty to raise the cattle or whatever, so then when the Plim is the high point where they built a signal fire, and okay, we've got a king coming and his retinue. We put the signal fire on, then the stock would be driven there, and then they didn't have emails at that time. They had to rely on these people coming together, and then they would be wined and dined there, and then they would also be, there's a prison near there, so the Tor was the place where they would put people who were out of control. And then now there is this bridge between there, and to make it easier, an old bridge to make it easier to drive the cattle across there, or the boars, or whatever they did. And then if they were out of control, they would put them in the prison, the Tor. All of this stuff has still vestiges where it is now. It still has vestiges of what was like 5,000 years ago. So Hannah was buried alive, but now we're talking about Torhana's freedom to allow her to make that step to do what's in everyone's best interest. She's standing up to defend the plan for the international government that will allow her her freedom. But Vixana reacted, instead of being buried alive, from understanding that she was not going to give up her life. She took it one step too far, and she became the witch. She became the witch, Vixana, the legend of Vixana. There is a legend that a witch named Vixana once lived in a cave at the foot of the Tor that she had the earth gnomes build for her. She was tall, bent, and ugly. She delighted in calling up a mist to surround. A mist is illusion, isn't it? A symbol of illusion, to surround any traveler who passed the bog at the foot of the Tor, so they would lose their way and be set down to their death. So she was weaving this illusion. And somebody, the man who stopped her, who killed her, threw her into the bog, he was able to recognize. He had special sight, so he was able to see through the illusion. That's what we're going to do, is we're going to see through the illusion of the witch and the idea of the witch hunt. So that's what I wanted to say, is we have the big lie, the grand lie has been told. A global genocide is devolving. Slavery is now coming out. They're talking about sex trafficking. They're talking about slavery. They're talking about coming up with a legislation now in states that ban slavery or do that. We're looking now at these two ideas, genocide and slavery. What causes them? We're coming up with an idea. We're going to have the eyes that can see through the illusion. We're going to start recognizing witches when we see them, not to bury them alive in a cave, but to stop the games that are being played, so that instead of putting them away forever, where they feel that they can't get their life, we're going to start to unravel this. The last thing, the application of that, has to do with the time machine and coming up, and then we're actually going to talk about time and the time and space continuum, and we're going to unravel the events that happened a long time ago to allow the future to come up. The time machine is something that is pretty cool. So look at it and find out the fourth row of the World Peace Marketing Strategy. So that's all I wanted to talk about today, is I wanted to give you some information about the eyes that can pierce through the grand lie. We've been hoping that Donald Trump would be held accountable. Many people have. Other people are doing everything they can to keep the illusion going. They don't understand what's going on. People are enslaved by those people. They hold them to them. People like Mitch McConnell now is starting to realize that he has to turn around from Trump and look at at the 2024. Instead of relying on Trump, he has to start to unravel this idea. So we are also going to start to pierce through that illusion of the grand lie and start to understand that by looking at all this information from the past. The past is our strength, our foundation. The present is basically where we are now, and we have the power. This is our power. The future is our plan that allows everybody to function on a higher level. Okay, I have a whole bunch to share with everybody, but right now I just wanted to say I hope that you've enjoyed this, and that I ask that you like, share, and subscribe, because this information is important. If you have 1 hour of your time, I have my timer up here. If you have 1 hour of your time and you want to share it with somebody, please share it with somebody. Sit down and drink a cup of, if we're talking about England, maybe tea or maybe ale, whatever you want, and sit down and just sit back and think about what it's like. Print out this Wikipedia thing about the Vixen tour, or there's a video that I saw of the story of it, and think about how that Stonehenge was a place that was brought in a lot of money from the king's coming. They left gold in the fields. Become a junior archaeologist and look at to see where it was and how Stonehenge functioned. So I ask that you like, share, and subscribe, but most of all share. Thank you.